I recently spoke to the former Federal Reserve Chief Alan Greenspan to get his views about the U.S. economy, and I asked him about the most recent GDP data and what that uneven growth in the U.S. means for the future.
Well, what these numbers show, essentially, is that, well, first of all, there was a significant downward revision in the fourth quarter's GDP, and that was more likely what the basic trend is. Where we grew at 2.4% in the fourth quarter with the revised figures, and it looks as though we're growing at about a 2% rate. And unfortunately for us, that looks to be fundamentally where we're going, largely because of the fact that we ran into a very serious trouble in 2008 crisis, and our recovery out of it has not been matched by the way it was in 10 previous recoveries. And the fundamental reason is that long-lived assets with very long service lives, are still very extraordinarily suppressed. And this means buildings. It's a residential building, it's non-residential building, and fundamentally it is a very major increase in uncertainty in both households and in business, which has been suppressing this level and looks to me as though it's going to continue to do so for a while.
Do you feel that Americans or consumers perhaps realize the gravity of the situation they're in? I'm speaking about deleveraging, increasing the U.S. savings rate. Do you think that's being improved in the United States, albeit during this slow period of growth?
Well, I think the problem with the savings rate is, I think you know, is it's going down. And it's going down basically because there's a very strong movement towards consumption in the United States. And we have to be careful because the standard of living essentially is directed to output per hour. And output per hour requires a capital stock which is essentially growing, and growing reasonably rapidly. The only way you can have capital investment in the United States is gross domestic savings and whatever we can borrow from abroad. That, of necessity, is exactly what direct domestic investment will be. Our savings rate has come down very dramatically, largely in the household sector, but also because our government sector has turned negative savings. And that is a trend which does not appear to be turning at this stage.
And a lot of people, including folks regular people I speak to on the street, who they see the economy, they see the numbers that they show in the media, they see politicians talking about how tough the economy is, how much slower growth we'll have to accept. But at the same time, we see the stock market, of course, hitting all-time highs. And I think there's perhaps a disconnect or a misunderstanding between the average American, if you will, and what's happening on Wall Street. How do you explain that?
Well, you have to start off with recognizing that stock prices have a long-term trend which is close to 7% a year. This goes all the way back as far as we can take it. Half is inflation, half is real growth. And we've just been through a period where we just pierced the stock markets of 2007. And if you think of 2007, 7 years of no change, it's basically telling you that what we're seeing now is the catch-up that is required and always has happened. So I find that, as I've said, the only thing that's going for the United States at this particular stage, and which is actually keeping our 2% growth rate from going lower, is the increase in asset values, particularly in stocks, but obviously in housing and commercial real estate.
And in part, we have the Federal Reserve to thank because they've brought rates down during the crisis, and that has helped, I guess, encourage asset prices to go higher. Do you think that's the right policy?
Well, it's very difficult to judge except in retrospect. And I've been in the business long enough to know that retrospection is extraordinarily perceptive. What it has done, clearly, is by lowering the real long-term interest rates, for example, the Federal Reserve has bought up a very substantial proportion of the new issuance of U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. The effect of that is to keep long-term rates down, and that, of course, has kept capitalization ratios down, and hence prices start to move up quite significantly when you begin to move the capitalization rate down almost by definition. And that's what we're experiencing. So that, fortunately, the Federal Reserve is now going to have to reverse gears, and they're acutely aware of that. And it's not going to be easy.
And that goes into the second question. That's Janet Yellen, who is now responsible for this potential paring back. As to the timing, we're not sure, but we know that she's gone on the record saying that it will happen, but not in the near future. Are you confident that she's going to be able to navigate those difficult waters going forward?
Oh, yes. I mean, I've worked with her for years. She was, as you know, president of the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank and a governor of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. So I've worked with her for many years. She's a very competent economist. She's got a tough job, but I'm glad she's there.
What's going to be the toughest part for her?
Toughest part is going to be to maneuver the political processes and the economic processes which are involved in contracting credits. The political system loves when you're expanding. They hate it when you're contracting. In my 18 and a half years at the Federal Reserve, I got an extraordinarily large number of letters saying we should lower interest rates. I never received a single one saying we should raise them.
That was, of course, Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve. We will have our second installment of that interview with him tomorrow. We'll be speaking about his personal experiences as the head of the most powerful central bank in the world.